this hall is not full by now. So we expect that people would soon join us. We also want to recognize all our members, Pragmatics members online. We'll recognize them once we get to know those of them online. I'm sure that some of our professors would join online. Professor Babatson from Ilori promised to join. Oh, fantastic. Can we give all of them a round of applause? Beautiful. So as we can see, everything is set, and we'll kick off right away. Not forgetting to recognize our media people present. I think I can see someone from alimoshotoday.com, Miss Eweje. Please, can we give her a round of applause? Okay, so without wasting our time, I think we need to start. Can we call on the HOD for his welcome address? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oni. Because of time, I think we need to skip some things. We have to skip the HOD's address maybe to some other time. I would like to invite the Vice Chancellor, Lagos State University, represented by the Dean. I think we still have... So please, let's just welcome Professor Odebumi so that... Okay.
Good morning, our invited audience, especially the president of the association, members of the board of studies, board of trustees rather, and leadership of the Pragmatics Association of Nigeria. The guest lecturer, Professor Theovan Louvain, the acting head Department of English, Lagos State University, our distinguished participants, physical and virtual, staff and students of our preferred university, Lagos State University. We are Lasu. We are great. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to Lagos State University, Ojo. Of course, as earlier said, the university of first choice in the center of excellence. I learned that LASU is well represented in your association, both as members and executives. Impliedly, that is the faculty representation. This is not a surprise because one of the things we cherish in academics is research and innovation. I am well informed that this year's edition is the third in the series of your guest lectures. We are happy to be the host, at least Faculty of Arts, for this edition, even though it is majorly virtual. Your topic for this year, evaluations in multimodality, is interesting and very apt. It could not have come at a better time. We are in an election year in Nigeria with all the multimodal messages going out. You have also chosen the right speaker. He is eminently qualified to do justice to the topic. I believe that at the end of the program, participants will come out fulfilled and enriched to analyze and interpret the messages. I invite you all to move around our campus in your free time and enjoy the beautiful Lasu environment. I commend the organizers of this program, the Pragmatics Association of Nigeria, and its leadership for the vision of this lecture. Once again, I welcome you to Lagos State University. We are Lasu. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Please, a round of applause for him. Without wasting our time, we'll call the president of the Pragmatics Association of Nigeria, Professor Akin Odebomi, to give Pran's presidential address. Please, a round of applause.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'll simply read my speech in about 3 minutes so we don't waste time. The Vice Chancellor, Lagos State University, the Dean of Arts, thank you very much, sir, the head of the Department of English, who is also the LOC chair, and our secretary at the national level. So LASU is very lucky to have got so many people on the board of the association, which is the first in Nigeria and the largest in Africa. The first in Africa and the largest in Africa. I also acknowledge all members of the LOC, members of our distinguished association, academics from LASU, students of LASU. We are LASU. Okay. I thought we would say we are proud and we are great. The two of them should matter. Okay. Students who are members of our association from all parts of Nigeria, and of course you can see the representation online. Members of the press, ladies and gentlemen, I especially welcome the guest lecturer, the distinguished scholar of discourse analysis, who is the key originator of the theory called the multimodal critical discourse analysis, Professor Theo van Leeuwen of Southern Denmark University, Denmark. We are very lucky to have him, and he proudly accepted our invitation, which means we are making our impact. And of course, we are welcoming him virtually to this great university, to the warm embrace also of the Pragmatics Association of Nigeria, where he has been long desired to be. It is unfortunate that we lost the opportunity to have him here physically to administrative drag pulled by economic unfriendliness. But we appreciate the virtual window, which all the same enables the event. The program is not only a realization of the capacity building duty of our association to its members, but also a confirmation of the niche that LASU has constructed for itself in the operations of our association, with the track record of hosting our maiden conference here in this hall in 2018, and now our third international guest lecture. Our first international lecture was delivered by one of the global fathers of pragmatics in the person of Professor Jacob May, but we call him Jacob May. He's actually Jacob May, Jacob May of Southern Denmark University in 2020. The second was given by Professor Anita Fetzer of the University of Augsburg, Germany in 2021. And Professor Jacob May is known for his theory of pragmism, whose practice slant has currently dominated the pragmatic analysis of discursively grounded data among Nigerian students and scholars. Anita Fetzer's interventions in context theorizing and political discourse have begun to influence pragmatic analysis in several pragmatic circles in Nigeria. Van Leeuwen's multimodal critical discourse analysis is the favorite and the indispensable tool for pragmaticists, semioticians, stylisticians, and discourse analysts whose arts are in the service of making nuanced meanings of multimodal text and discourses. The multitude of these fans and admirers of Van Leeuwen and his interventions are seated in this hall and on the virtual space today to hear from the mouth of the horse. This encounter is one reason Pran members have excelled. The needed currency, which is the mainstay of SAM scholarship, is delivered. The opportunity to negotiate what is known with the authority wielder is another advantage. And when the participants fall into breakout sessions very soon, the engagement of the lecture in terms of its relevance and applications to participant specializations and research must be unquantifiable. In March 2023, Pran will be treating the members and other members of the public to another globally tasteful intellectual meal, which will be delivered by Professor Van Dyke, who is one of the three most influential proponents of the critical discourse analytical approach at Ajayi Crowther, or your state. And in the same year, Pran will offer its first set of research grants to its members. We look forward to seeing the windows of this initiative. Van Dyke told me personally that he will be coming physically, and we are sure he will be there with us in Oyo. Very shortly, we will hear Professor Van Leeuwen speak to us from a most authoritative pedestal on multimodal critical discourse analysis. And I believe it should be an enduring, professional, and game-changing encounter for many of us. Thank you very much for coming and for being part of this event. Thank you.
I'm sure that clap was for me. Can you do a better one for my president? I think that's better. To do another one, because he's our number one in the whole pragmatics world. Can you do a better clap for him? Thank you very much. You know, this is Lagos. We know how to treat people right. We are Lasu. No, that one is not for great people. We are Lasu. We are great. No, there should be some, you know, let's put a feast in now. We are Lasu. We are great. Aha, thank you. Give a round of applause for yourselves. Quickly, we'll call the dean to read the vice chancellor's goodwill message to the department. Thank you, sir.
You can see me wearing two caps. The one you are seeing is visible cap, and there is another invisible cap. This speech is on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, who is unavoidably absent today. The guest speaker, a scholar par excellence, Professor Theo Van Leeuwen, the national president of the Nigerian Pragmatics Association, who himself is a very pragmatic scholar. Professor Akin Odebumi. Other members of the association here present with us and in the virtual space. The head, Department of English, Dr. Pius Aime, renowned professors of the department and faculty, the entire academic and non-academic staff present, post and undergraduate students, men and women of the press, ladies and gentlemen. I bring you greetings from the Vice Chancellor of the university, Professor Ibiyemi Ibilola Olatunji Bello, MNI, who is unavoidably absent. The Vice Chancellor is committed to the intellectual advancement of the university and is, therefore, at all times delighted about intellectual meals such as this. Indeed, my standing before you is a good example of multimodal discourse, which we are today exploring. While I welcome you on behalf of our primus inter pares, the Vice Chancellor of the university, it is also my delight to welcome you too to the mother faculty of the university as the Dean of the Faculty of Arts. Of course, since all other faculties are in existence for the purpose of humans, arts, which promote studies on humanity, can arguably be described as the mother of all faculties. Fascinatingly, the topic of today's lecture is one that is useful for every researcher within the disciplines of art and humanities. This is because we all deal with humans, and the complex nature of human beings demand that all aspects of communication beyond the verbal mode are explored towards an understanding of human beings and the environment we dwell in. I am, therefore, most excited about this topic, and I'm certain that we have gathered for a sumptuous intellectual delicacy. Once again, on behalf of the Vice Chancellor, I thank the Association for the opportunity granted us to host this lecture. We implore you to explore the ambience of the university and enjoy the best of time in the Center of Excellence. I thank you all and hereby declare this event open to the glory of God and advancement of intellectualism. We are Lasu. We are great. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We are grateful for that wonderful goodwill message. Right now, we would call Dr. Khadijat Olaniyan to read the citation of Professor Van Leeuwen.
Thank you. The Dean, sir, ladies and gentlemen, students, I have with me a short biography of our guest speaker today. Professor Theo Van Leeuwen is a professor of language and communication at the University of Southern Denmark, an emeritus professor at the University of Technology, Sydney, and an honorary professor at the University of New South Wales and Lancaster University. He has published widely in the areas of visual communication, multimodality, and critical discourse analysis, and was a founding editor of the journal Social Semiotics and Visual Communication. His books include, among others, 1. Speech, Music, Sound, Multimodal Discourse, the Modes and Media of Contemporary Communication, which he co-authored with Gunter Kress. 2. Introducing Social Semiotics. 3. Discourse and Practice. 4. The Language of Color, Visual and Multimodal Research in Organization and Management Studies, which he also co-authored with Marcus Ololar and others. And lastly, the 3rd revised edition of Reading Images, the Grammar of Visual Design with Gunter Kress, and Multimodality and Identity. Ladies and gentlemen, Theo Van Leeuwen.
Okay, so we want to prepare for Professor Sylvan Luen to join us. But in the meantime, we want to play you some light music, and preferably jazz, so that we'll cool the tension a bit, get relaxed. They will be in the right frame of mind to listen to the lecture. While the citation was being read, our mother in the Department of English stepped in, Professor Bukola Atolagbe. Please, a round of applause for him. And also, one of our fathers, Professor Gabriel Oshoba. Not forgetting the youngest of our fathers, Professor Abolaji Mustafa. Okay, thank you, everybody. Let's feel relaxed while we wait for him to join us online. So while we're still enjoying the jazz, the main anchor for this event stepped in. I think it was held up by the traffic too. Please, can we give a round of applause to... They have not even allowed me. Don't preempt the person I'm going to mention. So can we give a round of applause to Dr. Ganiu Bangoshe, the guard. Please, can you step forward and take over your assignment?
Hi, my name is Valerie, and I always...
My Lord Pragmatic, the National President, Pragmatics Association of Nigeria, the phenomenal phenom of pragmatics, the erudite scholar, administrator par excellence, researcher extraordinaire, Professor Akin Odebumi. The Dean of Arts, my father and mentor,
Professor T.M. Salisu, and the head of Department of English, a renowned pragmatician, Dr. Pius Ahimen. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. The mother of the faculty, a renowned discourse analyst and phonologist, Professor Adebukola Atolagbe. Sociolinguist par excellence, Professor Abolaji Mustafa. My very amazing literary analyst, Dr. Olusegun Joseph. My big sister who has powerfully co-opted me into doing this with her, Dr. Olaomi Oniburaimo. And ladies and gentlemen, if you know anything about style, and if you are stylish in any way, and you have got some very good styles in you, then you must know the most prolific stylistician in Nigeria, Professor Gabriel Oshoba. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. My big auntie from the Faculty of Education, a renowned linguist from the Arabic unit, Dr. Olaniyo. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Invited guests, my good friend, Mr. Adejobi. Faculty members present, our world-class postgraduate and undergraduate students. A round of applause for yourselves. Gentlemen of the press, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gani Ubangbeshe. Again, I apologize for arriving late. I owe my national president the duty of receiving him from the airport. I couldn't do that yesterday, and I also could not appear to receive him at the department, but I am sure Oga has forgiven. Oga, am I forgiven, sir? Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Lagos State, where one of our natural resources is hold up. It is only in Lagos you can go to drop someone at the airport, and while the person is already in South Africa, you are still in the hold up, returning to your house. And so what would ordinarily have taken about 15 minutes to get here this morning, everybody coming from Igondo would know what I'm talking about. We had to spend about 45 minutes to an hour, and that explains why I got here late. Apologies. It is my delight to be here doing this, because this is not just a duty for me. This is a responsibility as a member of the Pragmatics Association of Nigeria, an organization, an association where we understand language beyond that which is said, and we interpret language as that which is implied. For instance, like I will tell my students, if you find on the wall of a police station the sentence, "Urinate here and win lot of prizes," only a pragmatician can explain to you the type of prize you will win by urinating on the wall of a bank. So pragmatics is a field that enables you to demystify, to deconstruct what we do with language. And we are delighted. I also want to appreciate everyone who has joined us in the virtual space. We thank you for being part of this. All of our fathers in Pran, Professor Wale Adegbite, Professor Salami, and Professor Babatunde, and all of our fathers, we thank you all for making this a success. I especially appreciate the head of my department, Dr. Ahimen, for all that he had to do to ensure that this day happened. This time, Monday, he was still everywhere to ensure that we get a very good hall for this event. But we thank God that this is happening. Dear students, I like to tell you that what we are doing here today can be described as the dance of a big masquerade. Professor Theo van Leeuwen is a scholar par excellence who has invested not less than 4 decades into the business of scholarship. I am particularly happy because 3 of my undergraduate supervisors are using his theory for their project. And so that explains to many of us that this is indeed a dance of the big masquerade. So take your time to confirm that your pen is working and that you have still got enough space on your jotter, because any moment from now, we are going to be enjoying the academic meal, and trust me, it is going to be very, very nourishing. Maybe we'll return to my big sister. And so while we are still waiting for the linguistic virtuoso to come online, I'd like to at this point invite to the lectern for his speech the father of the department, the host of the day's program, and an amazing pragmatician. Ladies and gentlemen, with a very loud applause, do welcome Dr. Pius Ayemen.
Thank you very much. Our very wonderful Dr. Ganin Bangboshe, fondly called Gab by our students. The Vice Chancellor, represented by the Dean, Faculty of Arts, Professor T.M. Salisu. The Dean, like you said, you're wearing 2 caps at this occasion. The Dean, Faculty of Arts. President, Pragmatics Association of Nigeria, Professor Akin Odebumi. That's my boss. You know, I'm his secretary. The guest lecturer, Emeritus Professor Van Leeuwen, senior colleagues both from LASU and other institutions, executive members of Pran, members of Board of Trustees, members of the Consultative Board here present. Professor Tolagbe, I recognize you. Professor Shoba, I recognize you. Distinguished participants, both virtual and physical, and our world-class students. We are LASU. We are LASU. Yes, we are very great. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2022 International Guest Lecture of the Pragmatics Association of Nigeria, hosted by the Department of English, Lagos State University. First, I want to thank the leadership of Pran for acceding to our request to host its events, including this one. Of course, this is not the first one. And for supporting us all the way. As the General Secretary of the Association, I know how keenly competed our programs are. And each time we bid, LASU is granted the hosting right. So I thank you, sir. And I thank your leadership, sir. It is on record that the Department of English, LASU, hosted the first ever national workshop on pragmatics research in Nigeria. The theme then was Pragmatics Research, Theory and Practice, and that was in 2018. However, things are different today, with many events being cancelled or postponed. You all are aware of that. Many academic conferences and so on are being cancelled or postponed. So that this event is taking place today is a testimony to the pragmatic leadership of Professor Akin Odebumi. He keeps saying we must go on. So, sir, I appreciate you, my president. The Lagos State University is on its way to becoming the #1 university in West Africa, especially in the area of research and innovation. And the Department of English, LASU, is part of that vision. The Department of English shall play its role through aggressive research, conferences, special lectures, academic workshops, and seminars, etc. Some of these will be organized in partnership with progressive organizations like ESAN, that's English Scholars Association of Nigeria, the Linguistic Association of Nigeria, West African Linguistic Association, PRAN, APRA, and even IPRA. Today's lecture is part of that drive. Very soon, we shall be inviting some of the intellectual giants in Africa, some of whom are attending this program, to our department, Lagos State University. I appreciate the lecturer of today, Professor Van Leeuwen, who is perhaps the greatest proponent of multimodality. He is ready to share from his wealth of experience in that field. It is a privilege, and I encourage everyone participating in this program to take advantage of it and interact with him. After the guest lecturer's presentation, Professor Bolaji Mustafa shall follow with a review. This is to assist those that may have problems with Professor Van Leeuwen's accent. So everyone is taken care of. Professor Mustafa, I want to say thank you for accepting to do the review. Thank you, sir. I appreciate the members of the LOC for their sacrifices of their time and other resources to put this lecture together. I also thank my senior colleagues in the department, Professor Adeleke Fakoya, Professor Atolagbe, Professor Shoba, and the immediate past head of department, Professor Ayodele, for supporting the idea of hosting this lecture. The Dean of the Faculty of Arts, Professor T.M. Salisu, also deserves a special appreciation for his numerous supports, including allowing us the use of this space free of charge. Thank you, my Dean. We have prepared a delicious intellectual meal, and what is left is, as they say, bon appetit. Enjoy a great lecture. Thank you very much.
We thank the head of department, Associate Professor Pius Aimen, for that very interesting welcome address. I'd like to acknowledge some of our members, members of the Pragmatics Association of Nigeria, who have come from other parts of the country in order to be part of this intellectual engagement. Among them, we have Shuaibu Adamu from the Department of English Language and Linguistics, Sokoto State University. We do not take your coming for granted. If you have to travel to Sokoto by land, I am not sure it can take less than a complete day or 2 days. We thank you for coming. We hope you enjoy the ambience of Lagos State University and the excellence of the Center of Excellence. I'd like to also appreciate the pen behind our department, the Departmental Secretary, Department of English, Mrs. Okafor, popularly known as Lolo. We thank you for all you do. We thank all of our adjunct lecturers present with us. Mr. Wasiu is here with us. A round of applause. we have Mr. Bisiriyu. And then one of our postgraduate students, Mrs. Karama Shogbuyi, is also here with us. All of the MA students here, thank you for joining us. While we are waiting for His Scholarly Eminence, Professor Emeritus Van Leeuwen, I'd like to engage our students one way or the other. I am sure one of the things we will be doing at the end of this day is to know how this lecture would have made you better students of English language. Those of you in 100 and 200 levels are probably still dealing with formal linguistics, phonology, grammar, semantics. Those in 400 level would have started encountering aspects of applied linguistics like sociolinguistics, semiotics, critical discourse analysis, pragmatics, and so on. However, we're going to have gifts for this. Personally, I am going to give 2 students who are able to answer my questions convincingly a copy of my book each. And the first question is, what would you consider the relevance of a course like English language? How do you think this course is relevant to you? Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, may I request that we are seated and quiet. We have in our midst already the linguistic virtuoso, the academic enigma, and the scholar par excellence. Before I bring up one of our scholars to read the citation of the guest speakers, I am delighted to welcome to our midst our very renowned Professor Adeleke Fakoya. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Please don't stop clapping. Don't stop clapping. We welcome the Professor of Applied Linguistics, Educational Sociolinguistics, and Cyber Discourse, Professor Adeleke Fakoya. Thank you for joining us. We move right away to the business of the day. But before then, before the dance of the big masquerade, it is essential that we all know who the man, Emeritus Professor Theo Van Leeuwen, is. And to do this, permit me to invite once again to the lectern a renowned linguist, Dr. Khadijat Olaniyan Shobowale. A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. She will be reading to us the citation of Professor Theo Van Leeuwen.
Thank you. The Vice Chancellor, Ma, ably represented by the Dean of Arts, eminent professors here seated, fellow colleagues, PG students of the faculty, and all other students, ladies and gentlemen, it brings me great pleasure to read to your hearing a short biography of our guest speaker today, Professor Theo Van Leeuwen. Professor Theo Van Leeuwen is a professor of language and communication at the University of Southern Denmark, an emeritus professor at the University of Technology, Sydney, and an honorary professor at the University of New South Wales and Leicester University. He has published widely in the areas of visual communication, multimodality, and critical discourse analysis, and was a founding editor of the journal Social Semiotics and Visual Communication. His books include, among others, 1. Speech, Music, Sound, multimodal discourse, the modes and the media of contemporary communication, which he co-authored with Gunter Kress. 2. Introducing social semiotics. 3. Discourse and practice. 4. The language of color, visual, and multimodal research in organization and management studies, which he co-authored with Marcus Olorer and others. 5. The third revised edition of Reading Images, the Grammar of Visual Design, which he equally co-authored with Gunter Kress. And of course, multimodality and identity. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest speaker, Professor Van Leeuwen.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are set right away for the academic meal. Let's enjoy it.
Well, let me begin to, can you hear me? Am I now on screen? And does everybody hear me? I'm here. Okay, good, thank you. You can hear me, that's important. So thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for the honor of inviting me to be a guest speaker at this conference. So my topic today is evaluation, and I'll now begin by sharing my screen so that you can see the slides that I've made up. If that works. Okay. I can't see myself, the PowerPoint, very clearly. Share. There it is. Okay. So. Okay, so now I'll see whether this is testing. I can change it to the next slide. No. Sorry, it is a little bit of. I have to get this up first. Okay. I just have to try this again. Now it's better. Okay. So, sorry for two things. That it's a little technical hiccup at the beginning, and also for my confusion. I had in my diary that this began at 11 o'clock Nigerian time, and apparently that was not right. But I'm glad that we can now begin. So my topic today will be the topic of evaluation. And I think this topic has become more and more important over the last probably about 30 years as an aspect of discourse studies. And that is, I believe, because evaluation has also become increasingly important in everyday social life everywhere. From the 1960s on, various kinds of explicit and formal ways of monitoring and managing and evaluating the activities of a wide range of people and organizations have come into being, in education, in business, in public service, in healthcare, and so on. Everywhere, activities are evaluated to check whether expectations, milestones, and objectives have been achieved, and all kinds of qualitative and quantitative techniques have developed for doing so, including for performance appraisals, data mining, for example, sentiment analysis that measures how people react and evaluate things by doing data mining, and survey and feedback software. Everything we do, increasingly in the public sphere, is increasingly evaluated in one way or another. So it is no wonder that linguists, discourse analysis, and discourse analysts have also begun to pay attention to this. So what I will do in my talk is first of all to give a bit of an introduction to it and a little bit of a historical background on the history of attention to evaluation in linguistics. And then I will discuss two major approaches to evaluation, one known under the term appraisal theory and one under the term legitimation. And I will compare and contrast those and how they work and evaluate them. Indeed, I will myself evaluate them. And then finally, I will say a few things about its application to the media, to the news media. So I'll begin with a very simple example that we all know, evaluation in schools. So this is just a few excerpts from a school report of a 12-year-old girl in high school. And so you can see that not only does she get marks out of 100, and also marked for her effort, excellent or good, but also these descriptive comments. Now, when I went to school back in the Netherlands, that didn't happen. There were only 3 things that were not directly assessment of subjects, and they translate as order, industry, and behavior. So in those days, what you were rated for with a number was whether you were an obedient school child who did, as ordered and as bidden by the teacher. But in these newer reports, there's more happening. She's talented and perceptive. She communicates well with her peers, although, more attention to detail would improve her grades. She's enthusiastic. She embraces a challenge, although bookwork was not boomwork, but bookwork. She has the ability in art but not applied herself. She's a delight to teach in all sorts of ways. What is evaluated is not only her knowledge and her achievements and her behavior to be an obedient child, but also her personality. There has to be a certain kind of personality. So what you see here is that that comes out also. Then I studied some more school reports from the same year, the same school over time. See that evaluation was not only about knowledge, but also about the number of values came into play. What are the things that were highly valued in these young school girls? Emotive investment in learning. She had to be enthusiastic, keen, interested. These words came back to this report. Effort, committed, conscientious, hardworking, cooperation, cooperative, pleasant, communicates well with peers, and also ability, talented, bright, intelligent, and of course punctuality and neatness, because the reports also had a report of how often she was late and a mark of how neatly she wore her school uniform and so on. So to be positively evaluated in those terms yields approval. In the example I just gave, she was a delight to teach. Being negatively evaluated yields disapproval. But this doesn't only happen in schools. Anders Björkvall and Nystrom Höök have studied the values by which Swedish public servants are evaluated in a fantastic research project. And they were also values to do with what kind of personality, what kind of person they were, not how well precisely they achieved outcomes in their actual work. The Swedish Employment Service, for example, valued being professional, inspiring, and trustworthy. Swedish police valued commitment, responsibility, and cooperation and helpfulness, not, for example, how many crimes you solve. or things like that. Maybe how many fines you impose. Of course, our life as academics, I do not know how far it's advanced in Nigeria, but I have worked in several countries, and increasingly too, academic life is punctuated by research, assessments, and of course reviews, course evaluations by students, performance appraisals, and so on. It happens in all spheres of life. We are constantly evaluating. Now, I want to give a short history of the linguistic evaluation research. Because, as I said before, it is only relatively recently that linguists, with one exception which I will mention, only relatively recent that linguists began to pay attention to this phenomenon. In the famous book, The Meaning of Meaning, from 1923, Ogden and Richard said, language has two functions. The symbolic function, which is recording, organizing, and communicating references about the world, so to speak, and the emotive function, the use of words to express or excite feelings and attitudes. But they did see that, but they also thought that the former was far more important. Because while symbolic language can be verified for being truth or false, in the emotive use of words, they said, truth or falsity is irrelevant. And that's an attitude that continued on, even in the 1980s book by Jeffrey Leach. This still was there. The writer appeals to our emotions. He said, we cannot confront his appeal with, I disagree with what you say, or I do not share your feelings in the same way as we could if he had made his feelings and values explicit. And elsewhere he says, I haven't put that on the slide, he said, there is something covert, implicit, and potentially insidious about effective meaning, emotive meaning. If a writer appeals to our emotions, he said, we cannot all confront his appeal with, I disagree, or, in the same way, and then we come back to that other. So reason was more valued more highly by these writers than emotion. And objectivity was more valued more highly than subjectivity, even though they recognized that emotional language. In the 1930s, linguistics became far more formalistic. And there were other arguments for why evaluative meaning would not be part of it. Bloomfield even argued that meaning cannot be studied scientifically at all, and that linguists should focus on phonology and syntax. And when semantics finally returned in the 1960s, it tended to focus entirely on conceptual meaning. Because, again I quote from Leach's semantics book, studying conceptual meaning could reveal a complex and sophisticated organization of a kind which may be compared with and cross-related to similar organization in the syntactic and phonological levels of language. But that approach could not be applied to evaluative meaning, because evaluation works with, he said, insensitive scales of meaning rather than discrete choices and segmentable structures. So it was now rejected because it could not be done on the kind of scientific basis that they were striving for. One exception, though, as I mentioned, already in the 1920s, Voloshinov had seen evaluation as a fundamental aspect of language, needed to be paid attention to, inextricably intertwined with the referential or content sense of words. Every utterance, he said, is above all an evaluative orientation. Therefore, each element in a living utterance not only has a meaning, but also a value. And this insight, he said, is totally ignored by linguistics and has no reflection in its doctrine on the unity of it. Now, how did that start to change? Of course, already in the 1950s, with the rise of, for example, speech act theory and pragmatics indeed, and I'm very happy that I'm speaking here at the Pragmatics Society's conference. Pragmatics began to realize that the interpersonal, that it was not only about content and not only about syntax and phonology, but also about real communication. And that includes evaluation. Evaluation began to play a more important role gradually in discourse analysis, as it did in society, which I have already mentioned. For example, and that perhaps was one of the earlier ones, in Labov's interpersonally oriented analysis of narrative structure, where for the first time narratives were analyzed not in terms of what they were about, but in terms of the event, the kind of events and characters that were in them, but as in terms of being a storytelling event, an interaction between storytellers and their audiences. And evaluation played a key role in that, because as you know from that work, from time to time, these storytellers will be explicitly or implicitly assessing the value of what they're saying towards the audience. Does it matter? Is this important? And then they will assert the value of what they are talking about. And some other highlights, in 1989, evaluation was a central concern in Eleanor Ochs' special edition of the journal Text, the pragmatics of affect. Indeed, we now often speak of the affective turn in the discourse analysis. And Hanston and Thompson's edited volume Evaluation in Text in 2000 was perhaps the first one that started to put together some of the key aspects and theories in the burgeoning study of evaluation was developed. Focusing especially on the appraisal theory, which has been developed in the 1990s in Sydney, and on its application in corpus linguistic, large set of data. And so now I will first of all talk a little bit about appraisal theory, and also myself, as mentioned, appraise a certain aspect of it. Appraisal analysis was developed in Sydney by Jim Martin and Peter White during the 1990s. And it announced that it concerned itself with the construction of texts by communities of shared feelings and values, and with the linguistic mechanism for the sharing of emotions, tastes, and normative things. So it not only dealt with directly with these effects, but it also saw taste, appreciation, aesthetics as based on feelings, not, for example, on expert judgments, formal qualities of artworks or something, but on feeling. Even, they said, if that is sometimes formalized in systems of awards, grades, grants, prizes, and so on, even then, where it comes from, where it starts with, is feeling, emotion. And normative assessment, judgments, are also based on feelings, even if often recontextualized in a form of institutionalized feeling. So even judgments of what is right or wrong, or what is true or false, seen as ultimately based. Feelings were central in this theory, and it emphasized the use of evaluation in interpersonal communication among equals, communities of taste and emotion, communities of shared feelings and values, especially in social media, which is one of the fields in which appraisal theory has been applied greatly. So they do not specialize, so they not focus so much on what I started this talk with, the use of evaluation as a technology power. And I will come back to that point later. First, I want to explain a little bit more about appraisal analysis. The key things it's doing, and that is to now give a detailed account of kinds of evaluation. There are three major kinds of evaluation that I have already touched on in the previous slide. First one is affect, the emotive evaluation of certain things. They call that target. So emotive evaluation of people, places, things, actions, events, ideas, and so on, anything. That's why there is a target. And they have appreciation, which is the aesthetic evaluation of targets, and judgment, the normative evaluation of targets, the basis of values such as normality or whether it's proper behavior, or veracity, whether it is to be truthful. But these three aspects together, they refer to as attitude. A word that is, very value related. And all three of these kinds of evaluation may either be expressed in relation to the value systems of others, and I'll give an example of that, in order for the person who does the expression to either align themselves with these others, are not part of their community, as it were, or disalign themselves from that, disagree with it, and say, this is not what we in our community do about it. They call this aligning and disaligning type of evaluation heteroglossic, using a term from McKee. That doesn't happen when the speaker just expresses their own feelings. They call it monoglossic. And this aspect of the theory they refer to as engagement. And all three of these allow also for different level of strengths for these feelings and these judgments. So now I'll give you a few examples how that works. Because it is primarily expressed lexically. So what people have to do is actually quite similar to what other people who are not linguists do in sentiment analysis, seeking the words that express these different evaluations. So here are a few examples of the realization of affect, of the emotive things. You can they have miss, long for, yearn for, that is that you're inclined to it, or that you disinclined to it, that you're very fearful and terrorized. These are just a few of examples, because there are, of course, very many words that could fall. Unhappiness, cheerful, buoyant, like, love, adore, sad, broken-hearted, gloomy, tearful. To be secure, confident, comfortable, or insecure, and so on. Or it could be satisfied or dissatisfied. So basically, the analysis is to recognize words, the lexicon of affect, label it in terms of the kind of affect. Here you have the lexical realization of appreciation. For example, you can find something that you aesthetically appreciate. You can find it captivating, engaging, fascinating. It grabs you, as it were, or it doesn't grab you. It's dull, boring, dry, etc. But you can also have a formal judgment of it. You can find it harmonious, pure, elegant, or not, flawed, unclear, simplistic. And you can acknowledge values in it, that it's profound or valuable or priceless, shallow or false or new. I'll give you just some of these examples to give finally some lexical realizations of judgment. Social esteem, normality, you can find behavior or people, normal, natural, cool or not, predictable, capacity, powerful, healthy, mature, and so on and so on. You can see here that also propriety, moral, ethical, and so on, or bad, evil, immoral, veracity, truthful, frank, or dishonest, deceitful, are seen as evaluation that are ultimately based. Such lexical realizations, as I've just shown in the last 3 slides, of course, denote attitudes explicitly. But evaluations, Martin and White are well aware of that, can also be more implicit. They can also connote, or as they call it, invoke attitudes, and whether or not what they present, what kind of values how they value things, how they evaluate things, can depend on the context. For example, if you say of somebody, she is a genius, and that is explicitly positive, that's always going to be positive. But if you say she is a communist, then it depends on the context, whether that is negative or positive. For example, in which you are or are not a country where communism is officially in power. In the case of judgment, however, appraisal can also be expressed grammatically, especially in the case of heteroglossia, which is the alignment or disalignment with other people's judgment, which then may be modelized by the modality system, for example, by modal auxiliaries, may, perhaps, or by construction, like it is possible, it is likely that, and so on. So what is usually called modality in this theory becomes a matter of aligning or disaligning with other positions. And it loses the complexity and the variety of Halliday's work on modality, especially his distinction between objective and subjective of the truth or probability or likelihood particular. Of course, it's also radically socially constructionist. For example, journalistic, I'll come back to that at the end of my talk in some detail. Journalistic strategies for establishing factuality are explained in terms of evaluation, and hence is ultimately based on feeling, which I think that in the age of disinformation and fake news, challenges to climate science, etc., might a little bit problematic in us. So here, appraisal can be expressed grammatically, as I said, and in the case of heteroglossia, where the opinions of others may be modalized. For example, and here's just one bigger example, you can use mental process clauses with verbs like believe or think to align or disalign yourself with a view. This sentence is from an online encyclopedia. Europeans often thought Native Americans were worshipping the sun, and in fact they were addressing prayers to the Almighty, of which the sun is a symbol. So to think it, and also in the past, just indicates that thought of these Europeans not a fact, because in fact they were addressing one sentence. One view is disaligned with, and another view is aligned with. In fact, modality does become a matter of aligning and disaligning with other positions, and it also loses the complexity and the variety of Halliday's work on modality, especially its distinctive and objective. Here is a short few excerpts from thesis actually that uses appraisal theory by Joshua Hahn, and you can see how then these terms, this analytical framework is applied. So there are two texts about feminism, and he says that feminism is not about gender equality. So that is that view that feminism is not about gender equality is disaligned with, is denied, is about gender equality. Gender equality is seen as positive. Bullying is a negative behavior, such as is harassing, improper, defaming, and so on. And it's a hate group. I personally would say that hate is perhaps more anger than unhappiness, but that just shows differences and creeping to this kind of analysis. And the second one one has a much similar, also from Instagram. Feminism is not about men hating. Sorry. So again, it's denied and it's disaligned with. But now we get positive values, respecting, fighting for, and equality. So in these examples, says you can use using appraisal theory to first show how the first writer disaligns himself from a position not agreed with. It's probably he. He doesn't agree that feminism is a good thing. The writer does, and so these different theories used to do that. So it has been very widely applied to many different text styles, including media discourse, academic discourse, and very often social media discourse. However, despite its wide recognition, and that is the only systematic, detailed, and elaborate framework of evaluative language, appraisal analysis does require a certain degree of subjectivity, and it relies also on attitudinal inscriptions in the code text. You cannot it's not always an explicit criterion, and on common knowledge and evaluation context, including all the other texts to which the text is connected. However, it remains, one of the very detailed and explicit model for analyzing evaluation. Now, the second kind of theory and analysis that I wanted to. The same period, also during the 1990s, the critical discourse analysts also began to pay attention to evaluation. But in their work, feelings stem from ideologies rather than ideologies from feelings. And you could say this is how Van Dijk puts it, but you can also say, as I would say, the feelings are not fundamental, the value systems, we call them ideologies or something else, the value systems of cultures and societies, they are first, and feelings stem. Van Dijk says attitudes are based on or organized by more fundamental, that's deeper, fundamental ideologies that control the acquisition and the change of more specific attitude. For example, a racist ideology may control negative attitudes about immigration, affirmative action quotas, ethnic diversity, cultural relations, and many more things. And of course, how these racist ideologies developed and came into being during the colonial era is then an important studying these things. It is not just based on feelings. Also, critical discourse analysis maintains a distinction between modality and evaluation. In the words of Norman Fairclough, authors commit themselves with respect to, I would end both, respect to what is true and necessary, modality, what is true and necessary, as well as with respect to what is desirable or undesirable, what is good or bad, evaluation. The two things, modality and evaluation, needs to be kept, not conflated, according to Norman. They foreground the relation between evaluation and power, always asking who is, in a given context, empowered to evaluate. And that, of course, is not always, that can change, because today it's not only the people in power who evaluate, the consumers, who are constantly asked for feedback, and in universities, students who give course evaluations also have the power to evaluate, as do consumers of many things who are always asked feedback. So this is what I want to focus on here. A key concept in critical discourse analysis is legitimation. And that is an approach which I've used myself in my own work and developed, in fact, in book practice. It is closely related to, but it's not identical to appraisal. So I define legitimation as providing the spoken or sometimes unspoken answer to a fundamental question. Why do we do things in society the way that we do it, or in some part of society? Why is our social practices the way they are? I developed that initially in relation to a large corpus of texts that were on the compulsory schooling, and more specifically on the first day of school. Why do children have to go to school when they are sick? There are all sorts of ways in which that why is answered. And sometimes it's not answered at all, because after all, it has now been in a practice that has existed for a long time. But that has not always been the case. In the Netherlands, for example, where I was born and grew up, the compulsory schooling did not come into being until the 1890s. Was then much contested by many parents who didn't want their to sort of give their children to the school 5 days a week because they wanted the children to do things at home or at the farm and so on. It's a why question. Why do we do that? Why do we have to go to school? Why do we have to do it in this particular way? It can be answered in different ways. Many times it's answered into reference to authority. That can be personal authority, as when a parent says, you just do this because I tell you to. But it can also be the more impersonal authority, the authority of the law, or of rules, or of, bylaws, or rules in companies as well, including the authority of tradition. When the question of why is answered, because that's how we've always done it. Of course, close studies have discovered that these traditions also had a beginning and haven't really always been there. And that when they started, there was certainly debate about them, and there certainly were legitimations of different kind to bring them into being. There can also be rational arguments about the reasons and purposes of the practice, or aspects of them, like records I call personalization. For example, in the case of going to school, the text that I studied, which included texts that were addressed to authors, books for little children that were a little story about the first day at school and how nice it all is, would be shared, and books for teachers, how to handle children at the first day of school. So you find there many rationalizations by experts who then sort of say that for example, children, they talk about the nature of children, how they need to feel secure, and it's establishing the same routine, going to and from school will make your child feel secure, so a sort of psychological expertise brought in, argue, for going to school. But in that, we'll say that again, even in those rationalizations, there are values. In this case, the value will be. It can also be rationalized by more explicit reference, only reference to moral values, to things because they are in one way or in another good or not. And it can be, legitimation can also happen through the telling of stories, which doing the right thing leads to rewards, doing the wrong thing to misfortune and misery. So the storybooks for little children always led to a reward. Although they were a bit worried about going to school for the first time, what would it be like at the end of the day? They were happy that good things had happened. On the other hand, there are also many stories in life, including every day in the media, of how they were doing the wrong thing. lead to misfortune and misery. That's why we have so many. All these four, and this is my point, will in some way or another involve moral evaluation. Moral evaluation. And moral evaluation can be expressed in different ways. Yes, by means of evaluative lexis, as is done in appraisal theory. So words like, what are examples of things that are good? Healthy is good, normal is good, useful is good, natural is good, in certain contexts. It can also be expressed, I found in analyzing these, by means of abstractions, which are ways of referring to the things that people do, aspects of the practices, in an abstract way that brings in a quality or quality of that action linked to a moral value. So, for example, in a textbook for primary school teachers, going to school for the first time was referred to as taking up independence. Child is coming to take up independence. Playing in the playground, one of the activities of the first day at school, was referred to as getting along with others. So the values of independence, which is here seen as good, which of course you could talk about, and playing in and getting along with others are things that are good, therefore justified. We practice playing in the playground as an important part of the school day that has meaning and value, as well as the whole experience of going to school, meaning and value. And it can also be expressed by meaning of analogies. I sometimes think that analogies almost always have legitimation or delegitimation of the same textbook for teachers. When a seedling, then, they make an analogy with gardening. When a seedling is transplanted from one place to another, the transplantation may be a stimulus or a shock. The careful gardener seeks to minimize shock, so the plant is re-established as soon as possible. Similarly, for the child, moving from one provision, which is the play school, to another, primary school, a smooth transition requires that the change is sufficient to be stimulating, but not as drastic as the cause. Stimulating is a good thing, is a bad thing. Now, moral evaluation, except those words, healthy, normal, useful, natural, they do trigger a moral concept. But where does their goodness or badness come from? What is the discourse from which they sort of arise like the tip of an iceberg that is hidden beneath the water? What are the discourses of health, normativity, utilitarianism, etc., from which they stem, and that which are arguments, reasonings for the grounds, reasons for their legitimacy? The philosopher Alistair McIntyre has been very helpful to me in thinking. He has argued that moral evaluations of this kind, these tip of the iceberg ones, these triggers to a discourse that no longer fully have contact with, that such moral evaluations make debates unresolved. For example, in Australia, we have a debate about public versus private schools. Public schools are government schools, private schools where the parents have to pay a lot of money to go, and there are also some religious schools. In the debate, words are used that are moral evaluations. Words like equal, free. And they, of course, we would then readily say they was possible. But they are then used against each other in the debate. For example, the view that private schools are bad to create inequality, except the value of equal, which is seen as legitimating public schools and delegitimating private schools. But others say people must be free to choose the kind of school they want. Freedom, also a good thing. So as a result, says Alistair McIntyre, the assertion of principles functions as a mask for expressing personal preference, resulting in emotivism, the view that all judgments are nothing but expressions of preference and attitude, because we have now been alienated from the grounds, the roots these words have grown. Ms. Ruth Wodak, I wrote a paper that was a text analysis of a letter in which a Viennese magistrate refused the application of an immigrant worker to be reunited with his family. And his reason was that he could not provide his children with what they needed to grow up well, namely in space, i.e. separate bedrooms for each child. Our local practice, said this magistrate in the letter, therefore is to ensure sensible protection of the life environment, and for all good words, beneficial to the education and development of the child. So he legitimated his refusal of the family being together on these, which are not actually legal grounds, just value judgments. That to which, in fact, the person who wanted to be reunited with his family, protested and said that, it is perfectly possible for my children to develop well when they sleep together and when two of them together in one room. So we then researched, where do these judgments of this magistrate come from? And we found that in the 1920s, there were much more explicit discourses in Vienna in relation to public housing projects. Because before that, in fact, workers had lived in very bad circumstances. As indeed in Amsterdam, they still did when I grew up. Sometimes just two-room, but a family of 5 was no exception. And so there was a modern movement that wanted to make public housing where children would have their own rooms and better life and better and so on, and various other things. So there was a background to that idea, but by the time it got into the letter of the Viennese magistrate, the relation with that background and the particularities of it no longer existed. If so, we would have had to think it would actually be a good thing to help this, just as in earlier days, the workers were helped to get better housing. That would be a good thing. Help these workers of today, that had the bad circumstances today, to better housing. So we showed how traces of these discourses had entered the legal discourse in these methods, who had become to regard it as common sense, or put it in German, ortsüblich. This is how it is with us. It's in accordance with local custom. And so we concluded that moral evaluations cannot be understood by linguistic analysis alone, not just by recognizing sentiment-laden words. We need to understand them in the light of some cultural historical research into the discourse and practices that originally gave rise to them. We need to restore the grounds of why we think of these words good or bad, how that came into being. Okay, I've come closer to the end of my talk, but I wanted to say a few things about fact and comment, fact and opinion in the news media. Now, since the mid-19th century, media began to develop an ethos in which fact and comment, fact and evaluation were to be separated. Originally, this was instigated when the news agencies such as Reuters began in the middle of the 19th century. And there was a very practical reason for that, because the newspapers in those days in Europe and also in America were very political. And so the news agencies wanted to supply the newspapers with news from across the world that would be acceptable and also saleable, of course, to editors of different political persuasions. And so they had a number of strategies for doing this. That included turning news into small items, to always mention specific times and places, to always, corroborate, have at least two sources, and above all, to attributing to a source anything that was even remotely contentious, so that the newspaper could be seen as merely reporting, other people said, and not being responsible for evaluations themselves. Editorial, this was quite separate on a separate page, and quite clearly labeled as such. This became what Boyd Barrett, historian of news, the journalism of information, and it would eventually take over from the earlier journalism of arguments and political, and develop these strategies. Now, that is not to say that, of course, newspapers, see what I've got in the, that is not to say that reports that use these factualization strategies are always completely fair. Attribution, can align or disalign, as it does, for example, when you give more space to one view than another, or when you give perhaps more prominent space, begin the article with one view and have that in the headline and not the other view. There are many ways for even factual reports to do that, as are the use of saying verbs. You can align with something by saying that somebody states or shows or demonstrates and then give an opinion, or disalign to different degrees by saying that they claim, argue, which implicitly means that it is true. Martin and White, in the language of evaluation, see attribution as a strategy, as just one strategy for aligning or disaligning readers, and hence on as a facade of reality. And it's even the case today, this facade is not always even maintained. Just a few days ago, when I wrote these slides, I just opened the paper and could readily find examples where clearly appraisals or evaluations were not attributed to someone. Here is one, we don't need to go into details over the man whose pre-selection victory has derailed a female minister to be a future premier helped secure his shock read by pushing small-scale nuclear reactors in every community. So clearly derailing the ambitions is an abstract way of saying that he put himself up as a candidate for a pre-selection and then won. Derailing is not good. Derailing is deviating from the straight path. And so here it is definitely an evaluation. It's not being even more wrong. The FIFA World Cup in Qatar begins on Monday. It's grim reputation precedes. So the grim reputation is not attributed to anybody. First, there was the dubious bidding process, dubious. Then the system of modern slavery that Qatar used to build its. So very often we see, fact comment for fact and evaluation increasingly mixed. And also, and feelings becoming, part of discourses where we need to go if we want to be informed about the world. Now, Facebook and others, as you know, when it asks us to evaluate, it only asks us to evaluate in terms of our feelings, whether we like it or not. And about a year or two ago, Zuckerberg gave us 5 ways of liking: love, haha, button, haha, wow, sad, angry. So we're not asked whether we agree or not. We're not asked whether it is true or not. Yet these 2 criteria should, in my opinion, also be fundamental if we are to evaluate information. What I mentioned before, in the age of fake news, disinformation, and challenges to climate science, factuality might need to be rescued. And even if it is an ideal that can never be fully achieved, we might still attempt to strive for it and think of ways in which we evaluate it. And therefore we need to ask, what has gone wrong? If so much evaluation crept into the what used to be journalism of information, then we have to ask, what has gone wrong with a system in which information was judged credible enough to be accepted and used by people with different beliefs and worldview, and then commented on in different ways, in different ways. Yeah, that is not necessary. I'm not saying that the system of Reuters, as it was the news agencies, did that perfectly. For example, as Humboldt Bayer describes very clearly how when many former colonies became independent, they attempted to also have a news agency because of thinking that there was another way which information could be biased, that is from where it may, from what dominant places it mainly comes. And that, of course, that often has not succeeded. However, once we know these things, we can take them into account. We can still ask the question and begin to think about the project. How can we restore the credibility and legitimacy of this idea, adapt it to the world of today, so that we might have information that we can rely on? I have no answers for the question. Came up when I decided to end this lecture with a few comments on news today. And I'm going to think about it more, and I hope you will hear from me as I get a step further in working towards an answer to this question. Thank you. That's the end of my talk. Thank you.
Are you clapping because you understood everything? Or you're clapping because you know someone is coming to say everything all over again? So I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Gab, who is going to invite Professor to give us a review of what we've heard for the so far, so we can all be on the